Welcome to the 2007 Yu-Gi-Oh! Competitive Overview. If I had to summarize the year in a few words, I would say that we are on the cusp of archetype domination, but not in the way that you're probably thinking. There are archetypes which are featured in decks, to the point where some of the decks adopt the archetype naming convention we see today, but I would say that the game is mostly using archetypal cards as engines within decks, rather than being core cards in themselves. There is a lot of holdover from the oops, all staples cookie cutter control decks, but there is still a lot of innovation as well. As a quick refresher, here is the current ban list going into 2007. I would say that the most important hit is Cyberstein being emergency banned, as Cyberstein OTK was a whole deck. Future Fusion goes to 1, mainly because of the open-ended nature of Chimera Tech Overdragon's fusion materials. And other than that, there's a small hit on stall strategies with Gravity Bind and Wall of Revealing Light. Now, onto the events. I am going to be showing off the champion deck for each event, and at least one example of each unique deck type featured in the top 8, plus any decks that I think are creative or interesting. There is a good amount of repetition, so I will mostly be talking about key cards instead of staples or cards that I've already discussed in previous overviews. First event up is Shonen Jump Orlando, with the champion being Paul Lin with an Ancient Gear Chimera Tech deck. I would say that the Ancient Gear cards are being used as an engine in this deck, with Cannon and Soldier being needed to get Ancient Gear Drill online. The drill can then be used to fetch a desired spell, with good targets being Future Fusion, Overload Fusion, and Dimension Fusion, and I am sensing a pattern here. Future Fusion is being used for deck thinning and graveyard setup, with the main targets being Chimera Tech Overdragon, which can be used to send any number of machines from the deck to grave, including at least one Cyber Dragon. Then the other main target is Gatling Dragon, which explains the inclusion of Barrel Dragon and Blowback Dragon, and is importantly a dark attribute machine type monster like Chimera Tech, meaning that it can be brought out with Overload Fusion by banishing materials from the graveyard, which of course can be set up by the Future Fusion. Then the banished monsters can be special summoned with Dimension Fusion. It's a whole fusion life cycle, and I love it. Ancient Gear Cannon also has another use outside of the drill and the marginal burn damage, as it can be used to turn off spells and traps during the battle phase, which is pretty handy in the golden age of battle traps. Spell Counselor and Jinzo also offer spell and trap suppression to help further enable OTKs. Otherwise, there are some stall cards, and an important side note is that Chimera Tech wipes your board when it comes out, which can be used to turn off your own Gravity Bind, so Chimera Tech can then attack. As a final note for the deck, I like how Ancient Gear Drill can set Scapegoat directly from the deck, setting it up to be activated during the opponent's turn as a defensive option. Paul Lin, thank you for setting the tone for the year. Also featured in this event is a Monarch deck piloted by Mark Vasquez. Although Monarchs are not really an archetype at this point, since there is no internal synergy, and instead, they are more of a payoff for getting tribute fodder on board. Specifically Cyber Dragon, which can be done on the second turn, Soul Exchange, which steals an opponent's monster as tribute at the cost of the battle phase, Gravekeeper's Spy, which self-recruits, Treeborn Frog, which is a free tribute every turn, although this deck's decent trap lineup might mean that it's not always online. Then Twin-Headed Behemoth, which can be tributed once after it blocks an attack, which I guess could also describe Spirit Reaper in a pinch. Of course, Spirit Reaper still has that opportunistic hand disruption potential, discarding a card when it succeeds in attacking directly. This is a pretty familiar Monarch control deck, although I really like the Hand of Nifs and Phoenix in the side. I'm going to be peeking into the side deck whenever there looks like there are some main deck cards being featured, but dedicated side deck tech will have its own section at the end of the video. Next, Chris Evans, probably not the one you're thinking of, but maybe, brought a gadget deck with a bit of Chimera Tech influence. The basis of gadget beat decks at the time is summon a gadget, get a gadget. Basically out-advantage your opponent. The deck has a lot of 1-for-1 removal like Fisser, Nobleman of Crossout, Smashing Ground, Bottomless Trap Hole, and Sakuretsu Armor to get rid of your opponent's monsters, and then beat them to death with your little gadgets. Limiter Removal and Rush Recklessly are combat tricks to help the gadgets beat over opposing monsters, or to push damage. Breaker, Chiron the Mage, Exiled Force, and Snipe Hunter are more removal options, with Snipe Hunter being able to use duplicate gadgets as ammo. Overload Fusion can bring out Chimera Tech, which seems to be accidentally omitted from the deck list. Final card to note is Ultimate Offering, which can swarm the field with gadgets for a big tempo push while netting a lot of advantage. Mark Glass also brought a control deck, which is loosely described as a Monarch deck, with the double Zaborg, and I guess the Dark Dust Spirit and double Mobius in the side help to contribute to this categorization as well. This is one of those cookie-cutter control decks from previous events, although the Asura Priest and Don Zalug are cool throwback tech cards. Jamal Plummer also brought a Chimera Tech deck, with the Future Overload Dimension Fusion combo. But I want to point out the Cyber Dragon, Cyber Phoenix, Dequitchi the Battle-Chanted Locomotive package. Cyber Phoenix is a super popular card, and in combination with Cyber Dragon gives a lot of decks at the time the Cyber prefix. Monsters which replace themselves, like the Phoenix and Dequitchi, are the backbone of the format, because card advantage is incredibly important. UFO Turtle is the Fire Elemental Battle Floater, which can float into itself or the Phoenix. I also think the playset of Jar of Greed and maxing out on the Reckless Greed is interesting as well. Jar of Greed especially, since it's a cantrip, but only one that functions well in slow formats, making it a somewhat uncommon inclusion to see in decks. That covers the unique contenders in the event, so on to February. There are 2 events this month, the first being King Games Regional. Tony Mera is the champion with a genuine Dark World deck. This is more than just a Dark World engine, although I would not say that it is optimal even for the time. Double Brow for card draw, triple gold and silver for tempo, and to be used as deck devastation virus targets, and then the enablers, which are Dark World Lightning to pop facedown cards, Graceful Charity and Morphing Jar, which are just great card draw options, and interestingly enough, Braun, the Mad King of the Dark World, which is unreliable since it needs to get in for battle damage, and discards for no benefit. This is before Drag Down became a Dark World staple, it seems, although I think the Cheerful Coffin has a bit of a use case for the time as well. Night Assailant can recycle Morphing Jar or Magician of Faith. This deck is unpolished, but a pretty interesting attempt for a Dark World deck at the time. Dale Arroyo brought a Monarch control deck with a Diet Gravekeeper engine with triple Spy and a single guard. Interesting tech are Legendary Jujutsu Master, which is monster removal, and My Body as a Shield to protect your own monsters, especially with all the spell and trap based monster removal running around. Bringing in a burn deck, Matt Rona tops with Koala Burn, and I like that title much more than I like playing against burn decks. There are a lot of the same tools as Chain Burn, with the addition of Deskoala and Stealth Bird offering some monster-based damage. Triple Solemn is good for protecting Messenger of Peace or the Wave Motion Cannons, but it is pretty obvious that the deck is not interactive. Anthony Cruz brought a Cyber variant, electing to bring Blowback Dragon specifically for removal. There is no Gatling Dragon in the Fusion deck this time, although there is still the Triple Fusion package. I love the Drillroid tech in the main, as it can be pretty good in the format by turning off pesky flip effect monsters. There is also the super techie deck from Nicholas Cho, again with the Chimera Tech Triple Fusion package. Magical Merchant supplements Future Fusion as a way to fill the graveyard with monsters, with the added benefit of being able to net a spell or trap. Dark Necrofear is featured in this deck, but I think this might be an error in record keeping, as other sources replace it with Bazu the Soul Eater. No clue how that mix-up happened. There is Snipe Hunter in the deck, so maybe Dark Necrofear was intentional in this case, but I doubt it. I will try to fix this error as I see it, but some still might slip through the cracks. Other interesting tech is Mirage Dragon and Pitch Black Warwolf for trap suppression. These cards are quaint, but there is another similar card which might soon eclipse them. The last card I want to mention in the deck is Skull Lair, which is pretty pricey in terms of monster removal, although monster levels rarely exceed 6 in this format. Banishing several cards from the graveyard is still a hefty cost though. This card is important for enabling Dimension Fusion, and in later decks, Return from the Different Dimension. Kevin Cruz brings a mixed deck, with a lot of Monarch cards, and triple gold, and even Hydrogeddon for swarming. I already mentioned gold in the combination of Dark World Lightning and Graceful Charity, but Hydrogeddon is a one-card advantage engine, able to special summon another copy from deck, which can potentially special summon the third copy. As a result, this deck can definitely have some explosive turns. Moving on to Shonen Jump St. Louis, Carlo Perez brings a personal favorite deck of mine, Diamond Dude Turbo, and Turbo is not an exaggeration. This deck is very fast, as triple Destiny draw offers a lot of draw power. Getting a Malicious or Dasher into the graveyard is also a good idea. There is also double Emergency Call, Reinforcement of the Army, and triple Stratos to add a lot of consistency. And this is on top of Monster Gate and Reasoning, which add not only consistency, but tempo as well. Then there's the crown jewel of the deck, Destiny Hero Diamond Dude, which has the unique distinction of being able to get the effect of spell cards, but ignoring their costs. So Dimension Fusion without paying life points, or Magical Stone Excavation without the discard. Granted, you do have to get lucky, and then wait a turn for the actual effect. This deck is a lot of fun, and this is just about the strongest version of it from a pure Banlist perspective. Mark Glass brought a similar Diamond Dude Turbo deck, with the ratios mixed up a bit. Double Dasher is a bit unorthodox, since it can only activate the special summon on draw effect once per duel. But it is still banish ammo for the Divine Sword Phoenix Blade, which can be used to help replenish the hand, boost a monster's attack slightly, but especially to fuel Dimension Fusion for a big tempo push. Next up is Jeff Baumgartner with a posh Nouveau Rat Box, which just reminds me of Remy. This is not a novel rodent chef though, and instead a revamp of an older Rat Toolbox deck, which has a bunch of different tech cards, which can be special summoned from the deck with Giant Rat. Ancient Gear Engineer for a little bit of inherent protection and spell and trap removal, Card Trooper for card draw, and the ability to mill to power itself up, Exiled Force for monster removal, Injection Fairy Lily for big damage or battle-based monster removal, or even another rat to absorb another attack before bringing out the real target. Card Trooper is also a machine duplication target, leading to the Troop, Dupe, Scoop combo, where you summon Card Trooper, special summon 2 more with machine duplication, mill 9 cards, then attack for 5,700 damage. Dark Necrofear appears to replace Bazoo again, which is important because Bazoo is a keystone card enabling return from the different dimension. A lot of decks of the time are actually named based on these 2 cards, generalized to Bazoo return decks. Chris Bowling has a similar Bazoo-enabled combo deck, this time using the triple Dimension Fusion as part of the Chimera Tech package. But the part of the deck that I think is most important is the triple Card Trooper, Cyber Dragon, and Cyber Phoenix package, which is the basis of a lot of cyber or machine cookie cutter decks. This is mostly important for labeling decks for the distribution charts. A lot of duelists elect to swap out Card Trooper for Dekoichi or vice versa, based on taste. Tommy Wynn brought a Monarch deck, and I want to point out the triple DD Survivor and Dimensional Fisser, which offers a great source of recurring tribute fodder, and in a way which is fairly disruptive to a lot of meta decks, although Dimension Fusion is still a busted card. I also love this deck from Jeff Jones, which is just called Stratos. It has triple Stratos, and Elemental Hero Wildheart, which sorta replaces Mirage Dragon and Pitch Black Warwolf. Wildheart is pretty good, and I think it is funny to see it included in a few meta decks. As a quick point of trivia, and a small addendum to my previous video, I figured out that certain cards, specifically those which have had an erratum concerning the card's name, have been removed from some decklist sites. The entire Hero super archetype are affected by this, since Hero was capitalized by an errata. I have cross-referenced the tournament lists to deal with this, but there might still be some errors which creep into the video. Moving on to March, we have a new ban list which begins on March 1st, with the major hits being Stratos, Grand Mole, Chain Strike, Dimension Fusion, Overload Fusion, Crush Code Virus, and Mind Crush all to 1. These limits really affect the meta, specifically hurting the consistency of Hero and Chimera Tech decks, although they are both still playable. The namesake card and Chain Burn is limited, but the deck can still function as a generic burn deck with a single or even 0 copies of Chain Strike. It is a little funny that so many of these staple-based burn decks are called Chain Burn, but I guess Chain refers to chain links over Chain Strike specifically, as there are still a lot of traps and even a few quick play spells in their lists. Terminology is weird and a bit arbitrary. The first event I have on record featuring the new list is Shonen Jump Houston, with the champion bringing a Bazoo Card Trooper deck, piloted by Emon Ganian. Card Trooper is a replacement for Dekoichi, being the offensive powerhouse when it mills, as well as replacing itself on destruction. In my mind, Dekoichi is the defensive option and has a bit more utility before Tsukiyomi was banned. It is interesting that there is no machine duplication in this list, but understandable since hitting a single copy of each card is a bit unlikely. There is also the inclusion of Future Fusion, but no Overload Fusion. Instead, Skull Lair is included to banish cards from graveyard, offering an expensive but recurring removal option. This is on top of Bazoo, which is competing for cards in the graveyard to banish, to make the monster a more formidable beatstick. Banished cards are ammo though, and the playset of Return from the Different Dimension is the other half of the namesake for Bazoo return decks, which are a precursor to a lot of return-style decks. Foreshadowing. I think the limitation of Dimension Fusion is the reason why the power of Return from a Dimension was finally being properly realized. Also in the event is a true Diamond Dude Turbo deck, with both deck lists on the record having 39 cards, so I'm not sure what is missing. Maybe a third Trooper or another copy of Reasoning? Dimension Fusion to 1 does hurt the recovery and swarming of the deck, but it is still functional. Steven Arias brought a pretty standard Monarch deck with double Mobius, double Thestalos, and double Zaborg. Hydrageddon and Gravekeeper's Spy are also included for tribute fodder, and the legendary Jujutsu Master still cracks me up. This is very similar to Adam Korn's Gadget Monarch deck, with notable differences being the gadgets obviously, another copy of Brain Control, another Jujutsu Master, a couple Bottomless, and a Shrink. What is a bigger departure from the norm is a different Dimension Monarch deck, with triple DD Survivor and Dimensional Fisser for that recurring tribute fodder and resilient board presence. Also, look at that playset of triple Solemn next to Ring of Destruction and Return from the Different Dimension. Alex definitely understands that life points are a resource. Speaking of which, Return from the Different Dimension is slower than Dimension Fusion, but it is always live, since the player can always pay half their current life points. Not placing in the top 8 is Paul Leviton with a Ratty Gadget deck, which is not going to be featured in the event distribution graphics, but I still think is worth mentioning. I just really like Rat toolboxes. In particular, how it synergizes with the gadgets, of course, Card Trooper, Exiled Force, Injection Fairy Lily, and even Neospatian Grand Mole, which is a very good disruption tool to get rid of monsters on board, but only through battle. It works quite well against extra deck and tribute monsters, which the format features a few of each. Moving on to Bluebell, Pennsylvania Regional, Jeffrey Stochnik brought another Bazoo return deck, with the machine package, the Future Fusion, Dimension/Return combo, then also a playset of Magical Merchant, which again helps to load up the graveyard, as well as net that Speller Trap. Snipe Hunter for removal, Morphing Jar also to load up the graveyard, or more importantly to refill the hand, and Skull Lair makes another appearance, as does Wildheart, who I guess has the additional benefit of Skull Lair immunity. Adam Hamre played a Demise OTK deck, and there's just something about the combo which I think is hilarious. You use Advanced Ritual Art to dump 2 level 4 normal insect type monsters into the graveyard to bring out Demise King of Armageddon. Pay 2,000 life points, wipe the field, then special summon Doomdozer by banishing the 2 insects from the graveyard. Equip Doomdozer with Megamorph, then attack perfectly for game. Most of the remainder of the deck is stall and search cards, although the Metal Armored Bug is interesting. It can be sent to grave with ARA, although that is not enough to get out the Doomdozer on its own, and is more likely there as a backup plan if drawing too many normal monsters, or to be used with Contract with the Abyss as a backup strategy to get out the Demise. Metal Armored Bug also has the perfect amount of attack points for the OTK, if you can somehow get it on board instead of Doomdozer. Not terribly interactive, but this is a cool deck to look back on. Anthony Ling brought a Gadget Monarch deck, with a pretty standard deck list. Soul Exchange and Widespread Ruin as removal is a little interesting, but mostly this is what we have seen before. Why change what isn't broken? Also in the event was a creative deck called Tomato Fun by Paul Suwan. It does look like a lot of fun, and has a playset of Mystic Tomato to tutor out a toolbox of different dark monsters, notably DD Scoutplane, Danzalug, Nudoria and Snipe Hunter for removal, Spirit Rooper for defense, and Strike Ninja. Strike Ninja can dodge removal, but if you banish a DD Scoutplane from grave specifically, you can get a free monster on board. Strike Ninja is definitely one of my favorite ninjas, and a bit underrated. I wish this card were GOAT legal. There are also the playset of Mobius the Frost Monarch and Jinzo, who I think is an honorary monarch. Jinzo is also a machine, so it does synergize with Future Fusion, and do note that Future Fusion can also be used to dump a Scout Plane in the grave to set up for further combos. Last event in March is Shonen Jump Columbus. Top deck was another Diamond Dude Turbo variant. Almost identical lineup to Chris Petrovic's deck actually, opting to run a copy of Destiny Hero Dasher instead of Exiled Force, which notably does help with level variants for reasoning. And of course that once per duel effect can still special summon a monster. Pretty decent upside since you want the card to be discarded for Destiny draw anyway. Then there is a copy of Snatch Steal, because that card is busted and just went from banned to limited, unfortunately. Lazaro Bolito brought another Monarch deck, with a total of 7 Monarchs, Triple Spy, and notably Double Tomato, although there are not a ton of great targets outside of Sangan, which remember Sangan has not had the Erratum yet, making it one of the strongest tutors available. Edgar Flores also brought a Monarch deck, this time with a Hydrogeddon engine. Dark Dust Spirit is a really cool tech card, offering some mass removal, but is still really expensive as it is a spirit and will bounce itself back to hand during the end phase. Also note the Dust Tornado, which is not just another MST, since it does have a couple other use cases. Dan Bilbray brought a variation of the Demise OTK deck, this time opting not to run the Metal Armored Bug, but instead there are plenty of stall tools like Messenger of Peace, Swords of Revealing Light, Gravity Bind, and Wabaku. Remember that you can turn off Messenger of Peace and Gravity Bind with either Giant Trunade or Demise. I also like the 2 copies of Metamorphosis, which can be used to bring out Gatling Dragon for removal, or Cyber Twin Dragon, which can attack twice, and is another option to reach that perfect 8,000 points of damage while Demise is also on board. This increases consistency for when drawing all the other combo pieces except Megamorph. This is a very strong version of the deck. The last unique deck in the event is another from Jeff Baumgartner, with a new archetype, 6 Samurai. The small samurais are Iroh, which has a Drillroid or Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke effect to pop face-down monsters, Keimon to pop face-up spell or traps, Yaichi to pop face-down spell or traps, and Zanji to destroy monsters it attacks. All of the 6 samurais require another to be on board for their effects to be online, and Keimon and Yaichi forgo attacking to use their effects. In addition, the 6 samurai all have the Destruction Substitution effect, where they can force another samurai to take their place. Then for higher ranking samurai, we have Grandmaster and Great Shogun Shien. If you control a 6 samurai, you can special summon Grandmaster from hand, which then gets all the other 6 samurai effects online. Then, if the Grandmaster is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can recycle a 6 samurai from grave to hand, which can be a Grandmaster, even itself. Great Shogun Shien is similar, this time requiring 2 6 samurais on board to special summon itself from hand. It has the effect that your opponent can only activate 1 spell or trap each turn, which is deceptively powerful, but maybe not the most impactful effect quite yet. The metagame is still pretty slow at this point. Then it has the destruction effect as well. There is also a single copy of Return of the 6 Samurai, which is like an Archfiend's Roar for 6 samurai monsters, and I think a little stronger, since you can substitute another 6 samurai to be destroyed during the end phase. Supporting the samurais are Reinforcement of the Army, and even the Warrior Returning Alive, which is a great warrior support card, but one which is not seen that often. Moving on to April, we have Shonen Jump Montreal, won by Cesar Gonzalez with a Monarch deck. Gravekeeper's Spy, Cyber Dragon, and Treeborn Frog are the main tribute fodder, but a playset of Brain Control and a copy of Snatch Steal, as well as Soul Exchange, can turn your opponent's monsters into your tribute fodder to support a total of 8 monarchs. Second in the event is a Chain Burn deck brought by Yasmin Guthier, with only a single copy of Chain Strike after the Banlist hit, although cards like Accumulated Fortune might still contribute to the Chain namesake. The lineup is pretty standard, although a playset of Lava Golem, double Mecha Dog Maran, and a single Morphing Jar are the entire monster lineup. Do note that Lava Golem is pulling double duty as a disruption tool against your opponent's board, and as a burn card. Speaking of which, Maran is an unusual burn monster, but if you don't have anything else to do with your normal summon, you might as well set it. Speaking of the burn lineup, this deck is packed with triple Poison of the Old Man, Tremendous Fire, Dimension Wall, which is a weaker version of Magic Cylinder, Ring of Destruction, Just Desserts, and Secret Barrel, with the last two being powered up by Ojama Trio, which is another board disruption tool since it can prevent your opponent from swarming or committing more impactful monsters on board. This might be the strongest Ojama Trio has ever been, because it is in a tribute meta where getting rid of the tokens are difficult, although that is going to change soon. I'm not talking about synchros quite yet. One last note on this deck is the 2 copies of Pigeonholing Book of Spell, which has since been errated to Spellbook Organization, another name-changing erratum to throw a spanner in the works. The card is an interesting disruption tool, although one which is most viable in a snail-paced deck and format like this. Information is valuable, and slightly messing with your opponent's draws is useful, but I think the card is being mostly used since it is spell speed 2 and can contribute to higher chain links. Very interesting tech choice though. Jonathan Chauvin brought another Bazir return deck with a complete cast of familiar faces, this cyber package of Card Trooper, Cyber Dragon, and Cyber Phoenix, even with a copy of Machine Duplication, a playset of Magical Merchant and Snipe Hunter, complete with double Skull Lair for removal to capitalize off of that self-milling. Important note is Enemy Controller, which is another good disruption tool, either shifting battle positions or attributing a monster to steal an opponent's monster for the turn, and the modality really gives this card a lot of its utility. I also like how this deck is called Snipe Trooper, which is a cool and somewhat useful description. Another cool name is The Ritual, which was brought in by Andre Borges, and is another Demise OTK deck. Interesting ratios right off the bat are single Insect Knight, single Metal Armored Bug, and triple Neo Bug. I'm thinking this is because Andre couldn't get enough copies of Insect Knight, but that is pure conjecture. Triple Megamorph is probably better for consistency, but I would have to break out the hypergeometric calculator to double check that. This is on top of double Metamorphosis, with the usual suspects of Cyber Twin Dragon and Gatling Dragon. But Flame Ghost, Fusionist, and Super Viacroid Jumbo Drill are also interesting cards to include. Also, Contract with the Abyss is interesting too, as it could be substituted with End of the World, which would have more of an upside if there was another Dark Attribute Ritual target in the deck. But I think it is just here for consistency at the moment. Also in the event was King Games New Jersey Regional. But there is a bit of a problem, as I do not actually know who won this event. Impossible. Perhaps the archives are incomplete. Off of both sites, only one of them had the tournament listed, and only 2nd through 8th place. So, for once, here's the champion 2nd place deck, which happens to be a Destiny Monarch deck by Aldrain Butelan. There are 6 total Monarchs, as well as half a Cyber package with double Card Trooper and 2 Cyber Dragons. Outside of Treeborn Frog, the main tribute fodder is Destiny Hero Malicious and Disc Commander, which can be searched by Stratos and discarded to draw with Destiny Draw. Fearmonger revives the Disc Commander for even more draw power, although this is quite slow. And I am happy to announce that there will be plenty of experimentation with Destiny engines and Monarch decks in the near future. Also placing in the event was another Chainburn deck by Jonathan Roche, with just 4 monsters, a playset of Lava Golem, and a single Morphing Jar. So much of the deck is direct burn, with triple Tremendous Fire and Ceasefire sticking out to me in particular. This even carries on to the side deck, where there is even more burn in the form of Fire Darts and even DD Dynamite. DD Dynamite in particular is an interesting tech, since there are a lot of Bazoo Return or other self-banishing decks running around, since this Chainburn deck in particular does not have a good way to mass banish from the opponent's graveyard. Very spicy tech choice. Last event in April is Shonen Jump Anaheim, which is topped by another Demise OTK deck, this time by Michael Sungloak, returning to the triple Insect Knight, double Neobug, and single Metal Armored Bug ratios. There is also the triple ARA and single Contract with the Abyss. If we peek into the side deck, there's a copy of Zork, which is not the most consistent card, but can be a very impactful removal option. I love seeing it. Then, in the fusion deck are Chimeratech, Cyber End Dragon, Dark Bolter the Terrible, Darkblade the Dragon Knight, Fiend Skull Dragon, Reaper on the Nightmare, and Ryo Senshi. Because why not put your whole trade binder in the fusion deck? You aren't using it for anything else anyway. Also in the event is another Demise OTK deck, this time by Brian Hanley, mixing things up further with 2 Insect Knights and a main decked Shinato King of a Higher Plane, which requires ARA specifically since it is a light attribute monster. It has a little potential since it can push damage through defense position monsters, but I still prefer Zork. Also featured in the event was a Diamond Dew Turbo deck, again by Chris Bowling, with Destiny Hero Dasher, double Diamond Dude, triple Malicious, single Stratos, triple D-Draw. Note the triple Magical Stone Excavation, which can be another good use for a Divine Sword Phoenix Blade in hand. Another use for the Phoenix Blade is to send it to grave for the Creator's effect to resurrect another monster. Seeing the Creator is pretty cool, as the card has been pretty good since release, but a little awkward to use since it cannot be resurrected from grave itself. Very fun Diamond Dude Turbo deck overall. Therasak Punsumbat also brought a Destiny variant, which plays a Zaborg and Jinzo, so it could possibly be considered a Monarch deck, but I think it is closer to a hero-enhanced beatdown deck, with a Disc Commander, 1 Fearmonger, triple Malicious, 1 Stratos, and triple D-Draw. There is the triple Card Trooper and Limiter removal to push damage with Trooper or Cyber Dragon, or one of the mini machines in the fusion deck. Just look at this 33 card fusion deck, with too many obscure but mostly useless cards. Someone should really limit the size of the extra deck. I also like the Cyber Monarch Toolbox deck, with triple Trooper, triple Spy, DD Assailant, DD Warrior Lady, and double Tomato. Having so many stable cards and so much bleed over between proto-archetypes does not lend especially well for naming decks, as Andrew Nouveau's deck is labeled Trooper Hybrid and is listed with the archetype Card Trooper. This is still the Wild West of pre-archetype Yu-Gi-Oh for you. May had a single event, Shonen Jump Philadelphia, and was dominated by Monarch variants, with Jesse Samak being the champion. His deck is another Destiny Monarch deck, with triple Thestalos for hand disruption, and triple Zaborg for removal as the tribute payoffs. There is not too much else to note for the event though, so we are moving on to June with a minor banlist adjustment. Green Baboon, Defender of the Forest, and Magical Stone Excavation were limited, both for OCG list parity. The Green Baboon hit is not terribly impactful, but the Magical Stone Excavation hit is pretty hard on Diamond Dude Turbo decks, unfortunately. June has 4 events, the first of which being UK Nationals, with the champion being Andrew Lamb, with a Rogue Toolbox deck, which is actually a Rat Toolbox. The tools in the toolbox are Triple Trooper, Double Exiled Force, Injection Fairy Lily, and Matza the Zapper, which is a double attacker whose control cannot switch. Another neat tech is Iron Blacksmith Kotetsu, with the equipped spell targets being Premature Burial, Snatch Steal, and United We Stand, which has a very strong interaction with double attackers like the Zapper. There are a couple Zaborg, but this might not be enough on its own to consider it a Monarch deck. Also in the event was John Whitaker, piloting a gadget deck with the biggest removal suite I have ever seen. Droroid and Nobleman of Crossout for face-down monsters, Fisser, Hammershot, and Smashing Ground for cheap monster removal options, although coming at the cost of target selection, Limiter removal, triple Rush Recklessly, then triple Shrink as battle tricks, but with Limiter removal and Rush Recklessly also able to push damage, then Heavy Storm and Nobleman of Extermination for spell and trap removal, followed by triple Royal Decree for blanket trap negation, which helps to explain the 9 total quick play spells in the main deck. One other piece of tech is the playset of Hydrogeddon, which as mentioned earlier can be used to swarm in certain board states, and is helped out by both Shrink and Rush Recklessly. Continuing through the topping decks, we have a Hero/Earth beat deck by Duncan Tang, with a playset of Wildheart and a single Stratos, but then also a playset of Gigantus as a beater, but theoretically also as additional copies of Heavy Storm, albeit in an unreliable way. Other than that, the remainder of the deck is mostly staples. James Pennicott brought a burn deck, but not a chain burn deck specifically. Mostly this is a flip effect deck with Dokoichi and Morphing Jar for draw, Desk Koala for burn, Mask of Darkness for trap recursion, Night Assailant for removal and recurring those flip effects, and the pseudo flip effect monster Stealth Bird, which is more recurring burn damage. Other burn cards are Wave Motion Generator, Ceasefire, Magic Cylinder, and Ring of Destruction. Interesting tech are the playsets of counter trap cards, Pulling the Rug and Solemn Judgment. Pulling the Rug is a pretty format-dependent disruption tool, since it only hits monsters which have an effect upon being summoned. Specifically in this format, it really hurts Monarchs, since the opponent has already tributed a monster, then loses the actual Monarch to Pulling the Rug. Then there is also Solemn Judgment, which just stops everything. Probably there to protect recurring damage dealers like Stealth Bird and Wave Motion Cannon, or to protect the floodgates like Messenger of Peace, Level M Area B, and Gravity Bind. Mark Owl brought a Chainburn deck, this time with a couple Spy, the more common playset of Lava Golem, only 1 Accumulated Fortune for some reason, and then all the trap cards, including Triple Threatening Roar and Wabaku. Michael Stenning brought another Monarch deck, with 7 total Monarchs, but otherwise pretty much a deck composed of staples we have already talked about before. Mark Durant brought a Gravekeeper Monarch deck, named such in light of the playset of Necrovalley in the side deck, and the addition of Guard in the main deck. I say this leans a bit further to the Gravekeepers for categorization purposes, but this is still not quite to the point where Rite of Spirit and Royal Tribute are recognized for their power. On to Shonen Jump Minneapolis, where Shane Scurry won with a Destiny Hero beatdown variant, without any Monarchs at all. Metamorphosis is a key card for the deck, with quite a lot of options in the fusion deck, but another card to note is the full strength Crush Card Virus, which is very strong for the time. It is also cool that Malicious can be tributed for the Crush card, which makes me wonder why the card has not been teched in more often. Maybe this is supply and demand. Daniel Tate also brought a D-Hero deck, this time with a payoff of Ryza for removal, in addition to a playset of Thestalos and a single copy of Zaborg. This of course is supported by the Destiny engine for tribute fodder. Interesting note is this is one of the few decks to forego Cyber Dragon in the era. Jordan Nasser brought another gadget deck, with a couple interesting tech cards. A playset of Banisher of the Radiance is a very strong anti-meta choice, as is Neospatian Grand Mole, for some non-targeting, non-destruction removal, on top of an already pretty comprehensive removal lineup. The playset of Pulling the Rug and Solemn Judgment are also pseudo-removal, although Solemn is just great suppression in general. Third event in June is Canadian Nationals, topped by Dexter Dallett, with an anti-meta gadget deck, named mainly so due to the playset of Banisher of the Radiance. There is that bit of innovation in incorporating the Chimera Tech engine for both deck thinning and a huge tempo play in the late game. Since the main gadget engine is only 6 to 9 cards, there's generally a lot of room in gadget deck lists. Vin Lam also brought a Destiny Monarch deck, again with 2 Ryzes and 2 Thestalos, and I guess Genzo as well. It is weird not seeing Disc Commander, but Malicious is the main draw of the Destiny engine for many. Pun unintended. Also, note the playset of Trap Dust Shoot, which is some nasty hand disruption since it can preemptively deal with a problematic monster. Kind of off topic, but Vin's fusion deck is so large that it actually broke the deck constructor with a 23 card fusion deck as the side deck. What if, just as a thought, we limited the fusion deck to just 15 cards in the future? Back to nomenclature confusion, Matt Petal brought a machine aggro deck with the Cyber package plus Dokoichi, then some of the Tomato toolbox as well. Double machine dupe is cool for the troop dupe scoop, especially when combined with limiter removal. There's also Trap Dust Shoot again. Shoot, troop, doop, scoop. All that's missing is a loop. But we really shouldn't support degenerate gameplay just for another layer of rhyming, no matter how tempting. For even more naming confusion, there's a Destiny beat deck labeled as Diamond Dude Turbo by Richard Clegg, which is just wrong. Mostly I wanted to point out the labeling error, as there are a few times on record where the deck name does not match up with the deck list. Also, this deck has the distinction of being able to easily transition into a Destiny Monarch deck when bringing in 4 Monarchs from the side. For a bit of flavor, Matthew Lai brought a 6 Samurai deck, pretty similar to what we have seen before with triple Grandmaster, double Shogun Shin, triple Iroh, single Keimon, triple Yaichi, and single Zanji. Reasoning makes sense in such a level-diverse deck, adding for increased board presence. And pulling the rug continues to be a good disruption tool in the format. The final deck I am featuring from the event is a Destiny Monarch deck run by Dale Bolito, with triple Ryza and triple Thestalos. I think which Monarchs you actually run are a matter of player preference. There's the Destiny Draw/Tribute engine, and do note that Disc Commander and Malicious are targets for the single copy of Crush Card Virus. The deck is also notable because this is one of the first instances of the use of the Perfect Circle Monarch name that I have come across, where the circle refers to tributing a Monarch for another Monarch each round, to maintain pressure and continuously eat away at your opponent's resources. Last event in June is US Nationals, with the top deck being a Trooper Monarch deck by Adam Korn. Again, 6 Monarchs, trading a Thestalos for a Zaborg, and adding a Mobius. I like how Ryza is seeing more play, as the effect to not only remove a card from the field, but deny your opponent a more useful draw in the next round is quite powerful. There is another variant of the Cyber/Machine package with double Trooper, double Cyber Dragon, and triple Dekoichi, as well as a playset of Gravekeeper's Spy. I think it is weird to see this card as a staple, but it's still a very interesting historical note. Last card to note is Trap Dust Shoot, which is catching on, much to the dismay of many players. Also in the event is a deck called 13 Gauge Monarch, which has a jaw-dropping 13 Monarchs. Playsets of Mobius, Ryza, Thestalos, and Zaborg, and even a Grandmarg the Rock Monarch, which can be used to pop set cards. How many Monarchs is too many Monarchs? I don't know, but a third of your deck being tribute monsters seems pretty bricky to me. Another interestingly named deck is Aggro Bomb by Justin Womack, which has the Cyber package, then also a playset of Dark World Gold, powered by a playset of Dark World Lightning, and then complemented by a playset of Injection Fairy Lily. Gold might be some main deck tech against other discard strategies, but it does have some potential as an aggro tool as well. Also worth noting is the playset of Machine Duplication for the Troop Dupe Scoop combo, Nobleman of Extermination for trap removal, and Triple Dimensional Wall for some defense. Definitely a standout deck, although another one which is difficult to categorize. On to July with the European Championship. Top deck is by David Bellocchio, and is again labeled as Diamond Dude Turbo despite not playing Destiny Hero Diamond Dude. This is a pretty standard Destiny beat deck, with the most notable feature being the Double Dasher. Maybe Dasher is being used offensively, or maybe it's a consistency thing. Or maybe it's a Metamorphosis target, although this deck list lacks a fusion deck. I think this is also omitted in error, as I have checked both sources. Next in the event was a deck titled The Machine by Alessandro Nunzaito, which has the familiar Machine package, complete with double Machine Duplication, as well as the Hydro Get-On set, and 3 Ryza, which might push the deck into Monarch territory. The other note for the deck is the playset of Trap Dust Shoot, which is continuing the trend of meta adoption for the card. Oliver Smith-Voss brought a mixed Machine deck, which is a mix of a full Cyber package and some Monarchs. There is double Machine Duplication, but as a rare exception, playing Overload Fusion, but without Future Fusion. This does give the deck some late game power, but at the trade-off of not receiving deck thinning or graveyard setup. This is a very interesting choice. Last deck in the event I will be featuring is a burn deck by Bjorn Kraus, with a large flip effect lineup and a surprising amount of lockdown cards. Desk Koala and Stealth Bird are familiar burn tools, but a playset of Giant Germ is some odd swarming and burn tech. Mask of Darkness is for recurring traps, and Morphing Jar is to refill the hand, but I want to focus more on some of the lockdown cards. Not the usual suspects of Level Limit Area B, Messenger of Peace, Swords of Revealing Light, and Gravity Bind, but instead Mask of Restrict and Nightmare Wheel. Preventing tributes really hits the Monarch decks hard, but I guess could be used against other burn decks running Lava Golem as well. Nightmare Wheel is soft removal, preventing the monster from attacking or changing battle positions, with the upside of burning for 500 points each turn. In my opinion, it's not quite as strong as the more recent soft removal tool of Fiendish Chain, but definitely a card which makes sense in the metagame. There are also a playset of Solemn Judgment, Confiscation, and Trap Dust Shoot as disruption tools, mainly because protecting those sources of recurring damage is really important. The actual burn lineup is a little sparse, so recurring burn and Stealth Bird or the eventual burst from Wave Motion Cannon are both important in dealing a total of 8,000 damage. On to Shonen Jump Phoenix, with the champion deck being a machine variant by Thrisarak Punsambat. The deck has the Chimera Tech combo, the Cyber package complete with machine duplication, Megamorph and limiter removal to push damage, Crush Card Virus as a removal and disruption tool, and even a light hex sealed fusion, probably to be used to contact fuse into Cyber Twin or even Cyber End Dragon. This is a very cool deck, remixing a lot of what we've seen before, but with a bit of unique flair. Brian Rockenbach brought a Monarch variant, with 8 total Monarchs, a machine package, a playset of Spy, and a couple tomatoes. Pretty standard Monarch deck overall. 8 Monarchs, I sleep. 13 Monarchs. That is where the fun starts. Joshua Fuzi brought in a 45 card gadget deck, notably with double Banisher of the Radiance. I'm not sure if there was a concern over decking out, or maybe there was just too many good cards to choose from, or maybe 45 cards is optimal for drawing exactly one gadget, since that is what is required to get the ball rolling. Triple Phoenix gives the deck a little more protection and draw power since the deck is designed to out-advantage the opponent, while using 1-for-1 removal like Viscer, and also hand disruption like Confiscation and Trap Dust Shoot to deal with the opponent's threats. Last deck I am going to be speaking about in the event is a Destiny Beat deck with the Cyber package, and again, Double Dasher. This time we can see the Fusion deck as well, but I am still not sure what the best targets are to bring out. Maybe Dark Balta the Terrible for negation, or Ojama King to limit the opponent's swarming potential. Both are options to consider. It is cool seeing the extra deck as a toolbox, which is my favorite use of Metamorphosis, and one of the reasons I sorta wish we could have the card back, but I know, that is a wish waiting to be fulfilled by the Monkey's Paw. On to Shonen Jump Detroit, with Philly Luna's deck titled Crush. It is a Cyber Gravekeeper's Monarch deck, featuring Crush Card Virus and the 1 copy of Mind Crush which was allowed at the time. I like seeing the guard next to the triple Spy, but not quite yet the Gravekeeper's glory days. I don't blame the deck's creator for the name. This is an age where decks were basically goodcards.ydk. Also in the event was another Monarch deck, this time with the Destiny engine, a couple copies of Trooper, and 6 total Monarchs. This deck by Andre Borges is another instance of the Perfect Circle Monarch name, and looks pretty solid. There is a related Destiny Beat deck by Jeff Para, with the Troop Dupe Scoop combo, and Crush card of course, and like 2 or 3 copies of each monster in the Fusion deck, which is just excessive. Last event in July is the World Championships, with the World Champion being Andre Toro with a Circle Monarch deck. It is pretty standard with 6 Monarchs, the Cyber/Machine package, and Triple Spy. I wish I had more to say about the deck, but still, congratulations on the championship. Also in the event was a Lockdown/Burn deck by Adam Korn, with a Gravekeeper's engine, Stealth Bird, and Wave Motion Cannon, but interestingly, double Pulling the Rug, triple Solemn, and triple Dust Shoot, which is a whole lot of play disruption. This deck also has the distinction of transitioning from a burn deck to a more standard Monarch variant by bringing in all 15 cards from the side deck, and I wonder if this switcheroo caught anyone off guard. Definitely a cool concept. Last World competitor I want to feature is Dario Longo with a gadget deck, sporting a partial Cyber package, double DD Assailant, Exiled Force, Grand Mole, and a noteworthy piece of tech being Spell Shield Type 8. Getting 1-for-1 negation from a targeting spell is pretty strong, and the card has the option to negate any spell at a much steeper cost. Not sure if this is better than My Body as a Shield, but still a good read on the meta. On to August with Shonen Jump Indianapolis. Kenny So won the event with a burn deck, featuring a playset of Card Trooper for some reason. I guess for card draw, plus it gets under your own gravity bind, and I guess the draw effect will even go off under skill drain, and I am sold. Card Trooper just goes in everything. Speaking of skill drain, this is a strong tech choice, and shuts down most monster effects in the metagame, especially Monarchs. And then there are also those full sets of Solemn and Trap Dust Shoot. I think in this case, Wall of Revealing Light is actually being used as a defensive option, because you could pay 3,000 life points and shut down most of the relevant monsters in the format from attacking. The other deck I want to mention from this event is a Trooper Monarch deck, because Card Trooper goes in everything. Dekoichi, Spy, Trap Dust Shoot. Are you ready for a meta shakeup? Take a good look at that playset of Brain Control, because this is probably the last time you'll be seeing them in that quantity for a long time. September has a new TCG ban list, and there are 28 total changes. Major hits are the banning of Confiscation, Metamorphosis, Snatch Steal, and Ring of Destruction, all generic staples which are being hit. Then the limitation of Card Trooper, which hits most of the previous meta decks, Disc Commander, which is theoretically a nerf to the Destiny engine, but a lot of the lists that I have featured in this video only play one copy of Disc Commander anyway. Semi-limiting Malicious, on the other hand, does nerf the engine. The hit on Snipe Hunter means there is a little less removal running around. I would say Brain Control to 1 hits Monarch decks primarily, but other decks as collateral damage. Megamorph is limited to limit the consistency of OTK strategies, probably as an indirect hit to demise OTK decks. But I think the biggest impact on the list is on gadget decks, which does not totally remove the viability of the engine, as some lists were already playing 2 of each. But in particular, the deck loses so many 1-for-1 removal options. Trap Dust Shoot to 1, Smashing Ground to 1, and best, or worst of all, Fisser to 1. We got there. This list is absurd, but hopefully will be enough to breathe a lot of deck diversity back into the format, because you can't run 30 staples if half the staples are limited. Winning Shonen Jump DC is Jonathan LeBounty, with a modified Destiny Monarch deck, adapting pretty well to the new list. Single Trooper, double Malicious, with a reduction of 2 Destiny draw to compensate. Single Brain Control, single Transmigration Prophecy, which has some utility as graveyard disruption or recursion for cards like Tomatoes. Double Lightning Vortex as mass removal, which is worth noting since so much single target removal was just limited. And a similar thing can be said for the triple Phoenix Wing Wind Blast, which is removal and denies a draw. Almost like 3 more copies of Ryza. There is also double Pot of Avarice, since it was just semi-limited. Oh, and Breaker is back to 1, so that +1 in the form of spell and trap removal is definitely worth the normal summon. This is a very nice recovery after a list which had Destiny decks in its crosshairs. Hugo Adame brought a burn deck with some new cards to consider. Of course, the newly unbanned Breaker, a playset of Dark Mimic level 3, which is some draw support and a crush card target, Skill Drain, which we have seen before but is still a good floodgate, then the single Trap Dust Shoot and Wall of Revealing Light after the hits. And finally, a copy of Judgment of Anubis. And for those unaware, this card does quite a lot. First, it negates a spell which would destroy 1 or more spell or traps, then pops an opponent's monster, then burns them for the attack of that monster. This has a narrow activation condition, but is 2 for 2 in terms of card economy, functions as negation and removal, and burns. This is a wild card, all things considered. We have seen a stray zombie deck or 2 before, but what Dale Bolito brought is a more refined version with some new tools to play around with. For starters, Pyramid Turtle is still the heart of the deck, since it can special summon every other zombie in the deck. Plus, if you creature swap a battle floater like a Pyramid Turtle or Giant Rat, then you can attack over it, and since it goes to your graveyard, you get the floating effect. If Pyramid Turtle is the heart, then Card of Safe Return is the liver or something. You get the point. Drawing cards each time you special summon from grave gives the deck some serious draw power, with the main enablers for the deck being Zombie Master, Premature Burial, Call of the Haunted, Book of Life, which has the additional utility as graveyard disruption, and even Ill Blood, which is a Gemini monster that can revive other zombies after it is normal summoned while it is already on the field. Geminis are a bit of a weird concept. I also like those 2 copies of Dust Tornado as spell and trap removal, since MST is still at 1. Paul Levitin brought a very similar deck, down to double Dust Tornado, I think just dropping a Cyber Dragon for a Crush Card Virus, and substituting Sakuratsu Armor for Widespread Ruin. We are actually going to look at every deck in the event for this section, just because the ban list was so impactful in changing the status quo. Alex Thorne brought a Cyber deck with a neutered Cyber package missing 2 Troopers. But look at some of the tech in this deck. Main deck DD Crow and Kaiko the Ghost Destroyer as Graveyard Disruption. Dan Zalug for opportunistic hand disruption. Newly unbanned Magician of Faith. A copy of Rush Recklessly, just because. A playset of Mask of Restrict. More Pulling the Rug. And even the original Trap Hole. Trap Hole may be an error, and after referencing both lists, I still don't know what the last card of the deck was. But still, very interesting choices. I love the experimentation and novelty as players try to rebuild after a ban list. But only in hindsight, since having your favorite deck hit on the ban list could be gut-wrenching in the moment. Next in the event is another burn deck by Eric Wu, with the Dark Mimic level 3s for Crush Card and as a tomato target. Different Dimension Capsule to tutor for a key card. I'd bet it's probably Wave Motion Cannon. In addition, we see another copy of Judgment of Anubis, a playset of Skill Drain and Solemn Judgment, then the newly limited Trap Dust Shoot and Wall of Revealing Light. Card Trooper got limited, run Crush Card Virus and everything instead. Jerome Basie brought a Warrior deck, which is a sort of tomato toolbox that happens to feature a lot of warriors. Asura Priest to break through weak boards, double DD Assailant and DD Warrior Lady for banishing removal, Dan Zalug again for hand disruption, Exiled Force for monster removal, and Grand Mole for battle-based removal. Wow, limiting Smashing Ground and Fissure definitely left a want for monster removal, which seems to be being filled with monster-based monster removal now. I would categorize this as a warrior throwback deck, but if we peek into the side real quick, we can see some anti-meta tech with Banisher of the Radiance and Dimensional Fissure, but also DD Survivor to capitalize off of those banishing effects. And who could overlook that Dark Dust Spirit, since it is still a cheeky mass removal option. Last in the event was another Diamond Dude Turbo deck, this time with only a pair of Diamond Dudes. Malicious is at 2, and Magical Stone Excavation is at 1, which are only minor hits all things considered. Dimension Fusion and Return from the Different Dimension are still later gain tempo spike cards, but the monster lineup just looks so thin to me. October brings Shonen Jump Chicago and Durham, with Louis Raimondo topping Chicago with a burn deck. There are a few noteworthy cards in this deck. Even the single copy of Card Trooper still goes in everything. DD Capsule for searching that perfect card, quite slowly though. Dark Bribe as blanket negation, which can be used to protect Wave Motion Cannon or a Floodgate like the playset of Skill Drain. But what I find as slightly odd happens to be the lack of Crush Card Virus, despite playing triple Dark Mimic level 3 and Sangan. This may be Louis not having a copy of the card, but then there is also the argument that Crush Card does not really further the game state of the deck, where the main focus is stall and burn. Maybe Crush Card doesn't go in quite every deck. Austin Ruggieri brought a Perfect Circle Monarch deck with a decently sized Destiny engine. 1 Disc Commander, 2 copies of Fearmonger to special summon the commander from grave, double Malicious, single Stratos, and back to 3 copies of Destiny Draw. The Monarch lineup is triple Ryza, double Zaborg, plus Genzo, which helps to explain the small trap lineup. Interesting to see the double Threatening Roar in the main deck, as Monarch decks can still be bricky at times. Having Disc Commander, Card Trooper, Destiny Draw, and Pot of Avarice is a lot of draw power, which helps to mitigate the -1 from Threatening Roar. Dale Bolito brought almost the same zombie deck into the event, with the only changes being dropping the Morphing Jar and 1 copy of Nobleman of Crossout, with the addition of Crush Card Virus. This puts the deck at 40 cards, which probably helps with consistency a bit. Donald Myers brought a weird deck. It is labeled Cyber because of triple Cyber Dragon, but has double Zaborg, a Tomato Toolbox featuring Dan Zalug and Nudoria, which functions as monster removal, and then Flying Kamakiri number 1, with the only target being Sasuke Samurai number 4. I know the wrong one is featured in the graphic. The deck builder I was using to make the graphics has an engine limitation, which seems to affect cards with numbers in their name. Which is funny since Flying Kamakiri also has a number. The Sasuke Samurai are battle-based removal, but on a coin flip unfortunately. Otherwise, there's still a fair amount of spell and trap-based monster removal, and even My Body as a Shield to help counter the opponent's removal. My Body as a Shield is my favorite card in the game, and I just love seeing it pop up in the metagame every now and then. Miguel Albarrán brought a frankly underrated Monarch deck. This archetype feels like it's always outshined, somewhere in the shadow of stronger decks whenever it happens to make a meta appearance, even though Volcanics have a handful of really good cards. But before we get into the archetype cards, I want to pay respect to the Apprentice Magician engine/toolbox, where Apprentice can bring out Magician of Faith for spell recursion, Old Vindictive Magician for monster removal, and the new option, Crystal Seer, which was pretty hyped up at the time. This card is a +1 on flip, with the additional benefit of strong card selection, since you get to peek at 2 cards and select which to draw and the other to be returned to the bottom of the deck. Then there is also a Monarch package with triple Ryza, triple Thestalos, double Soul Exchange, but 0 Cyber Dragons. Now, onto the Volcanic engine, starting with Blaze Accelerator. This card has a few different effects, as it functions as targeting monster removal at the cost of discarding a Pyro monster with 500 or less attack. This comes at the additional cost of forfeiting your battle phase. Note that this is also the restriction imposed by Soul Exchange, and the 2 cards can be used in tandem strategically to minimize their downside. There is just one copy of Blaze Accelerator, which is a little counterintuitive, since you might think that you want to max out on copies of a linchpin card. But the playset of Volcanic Rocket can search the card from the deck or graveyard. The only place the card cannot be retrieved from is the Banish Zone, but I have not seen a copy of Soul Release in the metagame yet. Naturally drawing a Blaze Accelerator or Volcanic Rocket is pretty likely, with additional rockets being useful to recycle the Accelerator or just as a 1900 attack beatstick. Overall, this is a very underrated card. But what is being used as ammo for the Accelerator? Volcanic Shell actually, which is sort of better than Sinister Serpent since it is a round faster with the minor cost of 500 life points. Adding a shell to hand each turn is good card advantage, with the most obvious use being discard fodder for the Accelerator. And do note that the Accelerator is not a once per turn effect, so you can pop mini monsters while only forfeiting the 1 battle phase. Volcanic Shell is also good ammo for Snipe Hunter or the playset of Phoenix Wing Windblast. Note that the Pot of Avarice and Transmigration Prophecy can be used to recycle shells in grave. This is in addition to the normal Graveyard Disruption utility the Transmigration Prophecy has. Last card in the Volcanic engine is Wildfire, which costs 500 life points to pop a face-up Blaze Accelerator to then wipe the board and then summon a token. And it is important to note that the token can be used for tribute summons, although you can't attack the turn you activate the card. But wait, this is a quick play spell, so forfeiting a battle phase during the opponent's turn is not a real downside. I'm just now realizing that Wildfire is a very strong card. This may be the result of an embarrassment of removal riches, but I am wondering why there is not a playset of Scattershot as well, since that card functions for field clearing and burn damage. This deck makes some sacrifices in the aggressive front, but makes up for it with utility and advantage from the Volcanic engine. Last in the event is a deck from David Duran, which is reasonably labeled as a warrior deck. Main decking double Banisher of Radiance and triple Dimensional Fissure to disrupt a lot of the graveyard strategies that we've seen so far, and of course to enable DD's Survivor. Drillroid is again being featured as anti-facedown tech, in addition to Grand Mole and Exiled Force for removal, and Stratos, this time to search out a playset of Wildheart. It's still funny. Wildheart is meta, and if that's not absurd enough, I also like seeing the single copy of Fissure, which makes it feel almost like a staple in this format. On to Durham, which was topped by Philip Anthony with a zombie deck filled with familiar faces, although Deck Devastation Virus is a unique tech. This is not Crush Card, and I do not think that this is a record-keeping error, as the deck has Ryukoki and Illblood as targets. This card is very solid disruption, potentially wiping the board, emptying the hand, and even denying 3 turns of draws as the absolute ceiling. Do keep in mind that there is Pyramid Turtle as a tutor, makes it a lot easier to have a target available for the DDV. Jermal Jupiter also brought a zombie deck, but there are some tech cards way wilder than DDV. Interestingly, we see Asura Priest featured once again, then Decayed Commander, which functions for hand destruction like Spirit Reaper. There is Double Ryza and United We Stand, which can be used to power up Asura Priest for clearing taller boards, or to power up Decayed Commander to help beat over monsters and get off that discard effect. Probably the strongest attack boosting equip spell in the game for quite some time. Although, we all know Premature Burial is probably the strongest equip spell ever printed. Also placing the event was a burn deck by Nicholas Palmero, with a Cyber prefix coming off the Card Trooper and Triple Phoenix. And I guess the UFO Turtle, which is also there to summon the Phoenix. Otherwise, the deck feels like some of the other Wave Motion Cannon style stall and burn decks, even down to the DD Capsule, Dark Bribes, Solemn, and Skill Drain playsets. Last deck and the penultimate event for the year is one from Vinny Lister, with a Monarch variant playing the Apprentice Magician engine. The Apprentice engine looks like it could still be a little slow to me, and vulnerable to Nobleman of Crossout, but I can still see its utility. I guess you could even Book of Moon one of your own flip effects to get the effect off a second time, but that might be way too cute against anything other than a stall deck. The targets are of course again, Double Seer and a Magician of Faith, both of which are solid options for card advantage. There are also a few tomato targets as a small toolbox. Then there are the Triple Ryza, Triple Zaborg, and even Double Genzo now, which is reflected in the trap lineup. And now, to close off the year, with Shonen Jump San Mario, with the champion being Philly Luna, with a super techy Monarch build. Double main decked DD Crow as Graveyard Disruption, Marshmallow for defense and burn, Mask of Darkness as both trap recursion and notably a crush card target, Double Foolish Burial for Malicious, Commander, or Treeborn Frog, Return from the Different Dimension for late game recovery, and Lad. Light and Darkness Dragon is a very strong effect negator, as it can optimistically stop 6 effects, although this is still at a time where Treeborn Frog could deplete all of its attack points single-handedly. I believe this was changed by way of game mechanics many years later. Lad also has the upside of being able to revive a monster from grave when it is destroyed, but wipes your field in doing so, and this is a mandatory effect. This is a pretty strong stun card, and one of the few monsters worth 2 tributes at the time since it cannot be special summoned. Philly, I salute you for bringing something outside the box, and to great success. Although, I'm not sure all the credit should go to one person, Chris Patow also brought a Monarch build with Lad, with a playset of Spy and Double Thestalos. Then Jerry Wong brought a very similar deck, with even more tech. Most notably, Destiny Hero Plasma, which shines in a slow format, and has a niche use of getting rid of Ojama tokens, or even your own tokens from Scapegoat. Then there is Spell Striker, which is a free summon, and I guess even a direct attacker at times. Then if we peek into the side, there's even a set of DD Survivor, which functions best under some of the Banish-style anti-meta decks we have seen so far, but especially this one from John Umali. Double Banisher of the Radiance, Triple Defisser, Double Macrocosmos, then as the payoffs, Double DD Scout Plane and Triple Survivor. Also note that Goldsark can banish Scout Plane to get a monster on board. There is also a cheeky DD Warrior Lady being played, as well as Dark Bribe and Solemn Judgment to protect, and a playset of Ryza to attack. I do want to point out that Macrocosmos is one of the few relevant cards which can banish Blaze Accelerator, probably to the dismay of Charlie Law, who brought a Volcanic Monarch deck. His deck actually plays the Apprentice engine with Double Crystal Seer, Magician of Faith, and Old Vindictive as targets, 1 Mobius, 2 Ryza, 3 Thestalos, Double Kaiko to opportunistically banish cards from the opponent's graveyard, but also to prevent them from banishing cards as well. Then, the actual Volcanic card set is lean, with Double Rocket, a single Accelerator, Triple Shell, and a single Wildfire. Pretty unique hybrid deck all things considered. Finally, although not placing in the top 8, I want to point out this Baboon burn deck by Justin Trias, which of course plays the single allowed copy of Green Baboon, Defender of the Forest, some Cyber Dragons, and Triple Ryza, all on top of Rat Toolbox. Again, we see Neospatian Grandmole for removal, Nimble Momonga for swarming and life point restoration, and even Gyaku Gire Panda, which can attack under Gravity Bind for some decent damage when facing down a full board, with the additional upside of dealing piercing battle damage. Of course, Rat, Panda, and the Flying Squirrels are beasts for the Baboon. The deck also has a few of the burn traps, which scale based on board size with Ceasefire, Just Desserts, and Secret Barrel, which can be powered up by Ojama Trio. Those Ojama tokens are also a great way to push damage with the Panda, but oh no! In this event, there's the potential that they had the weakness of being used as tributes to bring out Destiny Hero Plasma. I wonder if that situation ever came up in the event. This deck is outside of the top 8, so it is an honorable mention, and will not be featured in the pie charts. Speaking of which, here is the overall performance for the year, and do forgive the difficulty in categorization, as there is still a lot of gray area when defining distinct decks, with all the oops all staple decks running around. But what I think is neat is seeing some of the proto-archetypes starting to really emerge. For those players that miss pre-archetype Yu-Gi-Oh!, this is almost the end of an era. Then, to end the video, I want to show off some of the weird and potentially useful side deck tech I noticed while making this video. I will be glossing over cards I have already mentioned, as well as main deck pieces which are stored in the side. These cards are organized by category rather than chronologically. I think I'm going to start with Floodgates, Negation, and Stun Tools as a broad category. Appropriate is sort of a stun card, since it dissuades your opponent from drawing cards by effects, but has the critical flaw of requiring your opponent to draw cards by effect for the card to be activated. That activation requirement means the card is always too awkward to see widespread success. Bizarrely, Royal Oppression is in a similar boat for the time, where the normal summon-based meta is just not quite suited for the card quite yet. Turning off special summoning is such a strong effect, but not necessarily so in a Monarch-based format. Necro Valley is another strong floodgate not suited to the Monarch meta, but does have some decent application with the actual archetype which it supports. Vanity's Fiend is almost a Monarch, but falls flat in a mostly normal summon format. Horse Black Flame Dragon level 8 is blanket spell negation, but requires running the level 6 dragon, which is not great, but also not terrible. Also functioning as spell negation are Spell Shield type 8, which has been mentioned earlier, but also Curse Seal of the Forbidden Spell, which has the upside of stopping you the spell and preventing your opponent from using any other spells with the same name for the rest of the duel. As a side note, this card might even have some application against spellbook decks when they eventually become a dominant force in the metagame. Spiritualism is another card that I always think will be useful someday, able to return a spell or trap to hand, with the upside of not being able to be negated, which theoretically makes it an out for most floodgates, but monsters are already becoming the floodgates at this point, like with Tiger King Wanghu, who shuts down low attack monsters by making them self-destruct. There is also Deck Devastation Virus, which is being played alongside either Zombraya the Dark or Giant Orc as targets, functions in much the same way. I want to end this section with Cloak and Dagger and Prohibition, which can be used to shut down one particular card, although naming the right card can be tricky. Speaking of which, there is quite a lot of hand disruption in this format. We have already talked about Mind Crush, Trap Dust Shoot, and Confiscation, but I also want to point out that Chain Destruction and Chain Disappearance are still seeing some play in the side decks, taking out copies of a card in hand, or even still in the main deck. Exchange actually saw a little competitive experimentation, and I think I have actually underrated this card, since it is information and hand disruption. But the real card that caught my attention was DD Designator, and this card is very strong, like contemporary meta strong, able to get a specific card out of the opponent's hand on a spell no less. Also on the topic of very specific counters is Double Snare, which I think only hits Genzo and Royal Decree in the format, as well as Mako, Master of Barriers, which tributes itself to pop a face-up continuous spell or trap. A decent effect, and apparently one strong enough to even see some meta experimentation. Kinetic, now Cypher Soldier, and Warrior Elimination are both good anti-warrior tech, and I expect one of the reasons we have not seen so much of these cards is the limited availability. System Down shuts down machine decks, and there was a lot of cyber packages, gadgets, and chimera tech running around in this format. Twister is back, largely because MST is at 1, but it's still funny to see. Forced Back negates a summon and returns the monster to hand, making the card a -1 unless used against a tribute monster like a Monarch. This card is similar to Pulling the Rug, and is again one that I didn't think saw any level of competitive success. Then for mass removal are Malevolent Catastrophe for spells and traps, and interestingly, Needle Sealing for face-up monsters. Moving on to cards that help deal damage, there is Inaba White Rabbit, one of my brother's favorite cards actually, which is able to attack under Gravity Bind or Messenger of Peace. This card is a spirit, so it works best in decks which do not need their normal summon, but that also means that it can sort of dodge spell-based removal. Big Bang Shot gives a monster a minor attack boost, but more importantly, piercing battle damage to break through defenses. Then there is even a playset of Mask of the Accursed, which not only stops a monster from attacking, but burns for 500 points each round. I'm not sure whether I like this card or Nightmare Wheel better. But on to the other side of the coin is defensive cards, starting with cards to prevent damage. Death Wombat stops effect damage and is sort of a floodgate. Peruku's Circle of Enchantment is a trap which does the same for a turn, and is actually pretty similar to another card, Hallowed Life Barrier, which could be argued to be an upgrade of Waboku, but it does come at the cost of a discard to prevent the effect damage. Threatening Roar is another similar card and stops the battle phase entirely. Kuribo, the granddaddy of every hand trap, stops a single attack, and is actually featured alongside Wing Kuribo by Lazaro, which is another card that can be used to stop damage for the turn, with the downside being that it has to be destroyed first. Maneke Neko is there too, which ends the opponent's entire turn, but is so hard to use as it is such a reactive card. Barrel Behind the Door is also a reactive card as a counter trap, which redirects effect damage, so best used against big damage cards like Ceasefire, Chain Strike, or just Desserts for example. Also in the category for defensive cards are a few life point restoration cards seeing play again. Mystic Walk, and have you ever noticed that's Mystic with a K? Is that a typo? Regardless, there is also Emergency Provisions, as we have seen inside decks before. Finally, I want to end with the triple question mark category, and this is just made up of weird cards like Vampire Lord, which I guess is still decent in 2007, Blocker by Tommy Wen, Mormolith, which can potentially wipe a board when combined with a big earth monster, Neospatian Dark Panther, which can copy an opponent's monster, both name and effect. Not sure what the best target for that was in the format. And then there is Carlo Perez, who is just out there in all the best ways. Cybernetic Magician, which can be used to beat over something or push damage. Double Spell, which can clone an opponent's spell, albeit at a premium. And Silent Swordsman level 5, which is immune to your opponent's spell effects. But it's a little funny to be able to say that Vampire Lord, Blocker, and Cybernetic Magician were all meta-relevant in 2007. I'm going to end on that note, as this concludes the 2007 competitive overview. Next time, we again ask the question, can one card define a metagame?